And I do tend to smile a lot, so.
I'm Nancy Ungerman. I will be interviewing Arthur Ungerman today. Today is June 17th, 2011. Arthur, where were you born?
I was born in St. Paul Hospital, the old St. Paul Hospital, and at the time I thought the nursing facilities were excellent because all of the nuns were the nurses, but that has changed today.
Let's see. Your parents born here too?
No, my parents were born in St. Joe, Missouri. In fact, they grew up around the corner from each other. And my grandfather's house was right around the corner from where my mother's family was around the corner from my father's family.
What brought them to Dallas?
Well, my grandfather tells the story that he escaped from the Balkans. I believe it was either Estonia or Latvia, but he escaped because he was about to be drafted in the army. And he told me that the Jews were drafted in the army immediately because they were put on the front line, and they were the ones to be killed immediately and protect the other people. And that was one of my first, probably first encounters with anti-Semitism as it was in my grandfather's time.
So your grandfather moved to Dallas
Yes.
first before your parents?
No, my grandfather moved directly to St. Joe, Missouri, and my grandmother moved to St. Joe, Missouri.
I see. When? What was the date on that?
Oh, that was probably the late 1800s.
And so what got your families to Dallas?
Well, before we got to Dallas, let me explain why my grandfather picked St. Joe, Missouri.
Good.
Very small city. Grandfather told me that he felt he had nothing. He didn't have any money. He had nothing. And he felt that that was the place to be because he could make his fortune in St. Joe, Missouri. And I asked him, how was that going to come about? And he said, St. Joe, Missouri is located halfway between the East Coast and the West Coast. And we have the Pony Express. And this is the station. And one day they'll build a bigger station, and because the Pony Express was so important. Of course, as history would have it, my grandfather's prediction was wrong because Western Union came in, and today St. Joe is exactly like it was in the late 1800s.
Oh, that's funny.
My grandfather also, I said, well, what business were you in? And he said, well, I'm a watchmaker and a jeweler, and I know how to fix watches, and he had a skill that all his life he knew how to fix the watches. But he told me, he says, you can't make any money fixing watches. And he says, I had to send 3 children to college, and they did, all graduated. And he said,
one of which is your mother.
One of which is my mother, who attended the University of Chicago in the 1920s, when not a lot of women even went to college. And she went to the University of Chicago, got her degree in drama. And as Nancy knows, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as I am my mother's son. She got her degree in drama, and they called it expression and teaching and the arts. In any event, he sent all of and probably people watching this remember my uncle Arthur Goldberg, who was very well known in the Jewish community here and just passed away a few years ago. So in any event, they left my dad, picked up, and my mother, and moved to Dallas. The reason they moved to Dallas, my father told me, is because it was so cold in St. Joe that he never wanted to be in cold climate again. And all the way through the time I was growing up, people would complain, because we didn't have air conditioning in the early days, and they would complain how hot it was and Shry, and he says, no. He says, I moved here because I didn't want the cold. And that's why my family is here. And it can't get too hot for me, and I sort of take after him. I love the heat. I love Dallas in the summer.
Interesting. That's very interesting. What was your father's profession?
My father was an attorney, and he had a partnership with his brother, Meyer Ungerman, and it was the name of the partnership was Ungerman, Hill, Ungerman, and Angrist. And they had started this back in the, I guess, in the 1930s. And that's what they did till the day everybody passed away. They were attorneys.
And your mother had a mini career, actually.
Yes, my mother was very steeped, of course, in the arts, and she would give book reviews. In fact, her big competitor, who went on to, my mother, I'd never tell her this if she was alive, but who went on to become very famous was Evelyn Oppenheimer. And Evelyn Oppenheimer and my mother used to do the circuit and give the book reviews. She also gave lessons at the house for elocution lessons, and she also would have all these pretty girls come over there. And I asked her, can I get into class? I would like you to teach me how to talk and how to breathe and the diaphragm and all the things that she was teaching them. Of course, that was not my real reason for being in the class. And that's where I made friends with a lot of the girls. Early on, that's one of the ways, and it hadn't stopped since.
That's funny. So, did you carry on the legal practice?
In those days, you really did what your parents told you to do. And there came a time in my life that my father decided that it was time for me to go to work, and he said, you are going field, which is at Holland Park Village, and had an absolutely fantastic time there. There was still, that was during the war, and there was, anti-Semitism was everywhere during World War II, because the sentiment was that it was the Jewish people that had caused all the trouble, and we would not have to have gone to war if it wasn't for the Jewish people. And that was the line. And some of the kids grew up believing that. Of course, it was absolutely absurd, but that's what happened. And in reality, I believe America stayed out of the war a little too long. So there was anti-Semitism there. And it stayed there all the way through the war.
Any other experiences with anti-Semitism?
That was probably the most prevalent, because everything was about the war. Everything, when you were growing up in that time, in the 40s, it was all about the war. And you would go to the village theater.
Like the rats.
Well, we'll have to digress. Before we left,
Okay.
my cousin Nancy says, we left a part of my growing up out. Before we moved to Mockingbird Lane in Lomo Alto, we lived, and we moved from South Dallas. We lived in this wonderful little house on Casa Loma, in back of the Lakewood Country Club. And at that time, I went to preschool in Lakewood. And it was just a fabulous neighborhood, and it was just like picturesque, and it was just clean. There was only one problem. And I was told at the school that they had a gang, and the gang was the Lakewood Rats. And they used to scare me and say the Lakewood Rats would catch all the little Jewish boys, and they would do bad things to them. And I said, "Oh, you're just trying to scare me." And I came home and I told Lily Mae, who, by the way, was Lily Mae took care of myself and my sister, and lived long enough to take care of my children. That's how long she was with us. So I told her, and she said, "Don't worry about it. You don't have to worry." And I said, "Good." Now, I like to play in the vacant lot across, right next door to our house. Lily Mae usually was stationed in the kitchen, and they had windows, and you could see into the vacant lot. Lo and behold, one day, I'm playing there, minding my own business, and they appear from nowhere. And there's the gang, the Lakewood Rats. And they're carrying this big rope. And they take the rope, and just like in the Westerns, and they throw the rope, there was a big tree there, over the limb. And they say, "We're going to take care of you, our little Jewish friend," or something, something like that, "and we're going to hang you." And Lily Mae was looking through the window. And I was about to, I don't know what I did, but she saw what was going on. Now, in those days, we didn't have these little Teflon frying pans. We had cast iron skillets. And she grabbed that cast iron skillet. She ran out of the house. She got right in front of all of them. And I mean, they could have attacked us in a minute. And she said, just like John Wayne, "I want to know who is going to walk up and touch Arthur first, because that's the first of many broken heads that will happen. This is a steel. This is a skillet, cast iron. Break one fell swoop, I can break your head with it." Lily taught me a lesson after that. She said, "Arthur," she said, "bullies are the most cowardly people alive." And of course, they turned and ran and they disappeared. And I never forgot that. All bullies really are cowards. And after that, they must have had a meeting, because that vacant lot was off limits to the Lakewood Rats as long as I lived there.
Good old Lily. A good story. Growing up, from word go, from your youngest years, what were your Jewish affiliations?
Well, I guess probably the first one was the AZA. And I went to Highland Park after Bradfield, and I was asked to be part of a formation of the AZA. And there were 5 or 6 of us, and they told me they're going to form a chapter. And the chapter was going to be called Henry Monsky. So I was one of the founding members of Henry Monsky, along with Sid Stahl and Donnie Zale and Arnold Sweet and wonderful people, Charlie Ross and Ralph Kellman. And so we formed that AZA group. Now, you have to understand, a lot of people, the kids today don't understand that when the flight from South Dallas started about that time, and all of the Jewish families had no place to go unless they went to Lakewood, but they wanted to go north. And by going north, that meant they went to Highland Park or University Park, because there was no Preston Hall, and everything stopped at Northwest Highway. So the schools had a huge Jewish population. That's the Highland Park Junior High and Highland Park High School. And it was only natural that we would come together. B'nai B'rith came in and set up this AZA group and helped us set it up, because we had more than enough people that were interested in joining this. And but when I tell people that, the younger people today, they say, "But I thought there was no Jewish people in Highland Park." And of course, it was almost the majority at one time. And I like to tell the story that eventually in the early 50s, they opened up Preston Hollow. And what the Jewish people did, they moved out of Highland Park and they went north. And the new homes were built with air conditioning. My father had to admit it was nicer with air conditioning than without air conditioning. and they had built, and they had electric stoves, and all of that came in the 50s. So the Jewish people, you know, being what they are, they gravitated out, and they moved out north. And that was out north, and they left. And some people wags would say, much to the relief of a lot of my friends that still stayed there. And in fact, it's true, because all my friends moved into their parents' house in Park Cities when their parents died. And they're going to have their children move in there when they die, because that's kind of like a holy grail.
Do you ever have thoughts when you pass your house on Mockingbird of someday living there?
I had those thoughts up until the time of what they call the Great Recession. And the market fell out, and I was a victim, and I no longer could have those thoughts anymore. It would have been impossible.
What temples or synagogues have you belonged to in your, starting from
South Dallas? It was Shereth Israel, when Shereth Israel was located in South Dallas. And of course, I have my early memories of going to Shereth Israel. One of the things I enjoyed was that across the street from Shereth Israel was this beautiful park, which I believe is City Park today. And during the high holidays, especially with my cousin Jay, we would leave Shereth Israel and we would go play in the park, and never to be seen until it was time when they were singing the last song and come back into the service. But it was a great place. The surroundings were just beautiful. And I remember one of the early rabbis was feared by all. I think that was Rabbi Gold. And he was sort of he probably was the nicest guy in the world, because he scared all of us. And then I believe there was Rabbi Weisfeld, who was just a charming, lovely man. He just, everybody loved him. So I went to Shereth Israel in those days, and until they moved, of course, to where they are today on Douglas. But I had a lot of memories of Sunday school there. And in fact, the way we got to Sunday school, to Shereth Israel, is that the bus would pick us up in front of the Village Theater and on Sunday morning, and they would drive us to South Dallas, and that's how we got to Sunday school every Sunday. And I had a lot of memories, because the most fun was not Sunday school, the most fun was going on the bus and raising a lot of cane on the bus, going and coming back. And that was just a ball, because there was no supervision. It was just the bus driver, and he ain't paying attention to what we were doing. So that was a lot of fun, going on the bus back and forth.
Any other congregations that you have?
Yeah, well, eventually, although my family was had been members of Shereth Israel, and I had been a member of Shereth Israel, after I got married, I switched over to Temple Shalom. And at the time, Temple Shalom was in the North Haven Church. That's where it started. And Saul Besser, of course, started Temple Shalom, and it was in that little church. And, well, if you don't tell a rabbi at Shereth Israel, but what really happened is that my wife said, I'm not sure if I want the kids to go to Hebrew school. And I said, well, they're going to Hebrew school if they go to Shereth Israel. And she says, well, what about this new temple, Temple Shalom? I said, well, I know a lot of my family, a lot of my cousins know Saul Besser, and I believe went to Blue Star Camp with him many years ago. And I said, I think it's going to be a little more liberal than what we are used to. And she says, all I care about is Hebrew school. I said, I don't think there's any Hebrew school there. This is compulsory. She says, we're joining, and she picked up the phone, called Saul, and said, Saul, we are joining, we're leaving Shereth Israel, and we're joining Temple Shalom. And the next thing I knew, I was in Temple Shalom at the North Haven Church, which I thought was kind of funny. So, and my son was bar mitzvahed there in Temple Shalom. So that was my other affiliation.
Judy, that's your wife?
Yes,
yeah.
that was my wife. She passed away 2 years ago. That's correct. And so I stayed at Temple Shalom.
And then did you join another congregation?
I rejoined another congregation. Oh, no, I did join another one. It was Temple Emmanuel. So I went from Temple, I forgot all about Temple Emmanuel. It was a short, very short period of time that I went there. But I actually rejoined Shereth Israel. And I did that because my son got married in Shereth Israel. And I felt that it would be better if I was in the same congregation because of my family, my history of the family at Shereth Israel. And so we just moved back to Shereth Israel, and I'm still a member of Shereth Israel. But let me tell you one thing about Temple Shalom that is when we did join, Sal Pesser said, Arthur, he said, I'm going to put you on a committee because I know you and you seem to have a good personality and calm people down, and I'm going to put you on the most contentious committee that we have here, and you will be co-chairman, not chairman. And your co-chairman will be your opposite. And I said, well, what is the committee? He says, it's the religious committee, but there is a subcommittee, and the issue is, do we support people wearing yarmulkes in Temple Shalom? And if we do, then we should have a box where the yarmulkes are available to people. And I said, oh my God. I said, you got to be kidding. I said, that's a huge issue. And he says, that's why I'm putting you in charge of, and with your you're a co-chairman. And I said, that's okay. So I did, and of course I loved it. I didn't tell it, but I love doing stuff. I just went crazy when I got there because the guy will remain unnamed. I don't know if he's still living, so we'll protect his identity. And he just, if you've ever been in one of the committee meetings at a synagogue or a temple, you know what happens. And he was just absolutely against putting any box against people wearing yarmulkes, against this, and he says, no, this is a reformed temple. And so I'll never forget, I was ready for him, and I stood up before all of the members of the committee, and I said, let me tell you something, Mr. Jones. Let me tell you something, Mr. Jones. I said, there will be a box there, and people will have a choice. And it is narrow-minded people like you that inhabit different synagogues and different temples that cause the issue. But by God, we're going to have one here because this is a free-thinking temple. And I made this huge speech, and everybody got up, and they started clapping. And these are people that came from, from all different kinds of temples from everywhere.
Great story.
P.S. To this day, which I did take my present wife in to show her, they do have, at that time they put the cardboard box. They have a beautiful gorgeous wooden box when you walk in, and it's overflowing with yarmulkes right at the doorway. And I pointed it out, and I said, this is my legacy, that box.
That's terrific. How did you meet your first wife?
Well, I met my first wife actually at a party at my Aunt Edith's house on Labor Day. And I had understood, and I think maybe Nancy was the one that said, well, be sure and come to this party because there's a girl from Oklahoma City that's coming in. And I want you to meet her. And I said, okay. But I have to tell you a little background, because just before the party on Labor Day, I had just come back hitchhiking around Europe. And this ties into my father at one point in time when I got back saying, you're going to go, I passed the bar by then, you're going to go to work at the law firm and you're going to get married. I mean, that was, and you minded your parents in those days. So I didn't think two things about it. So it was just sort of, it was, what's the Yiddish word for fate? Bashir. And I walk in and I meet Judy Mills at the party. and we get along famously. And I said, why don't you come in for Texas-Oklahoma weekend? It wasn't too far off. And she says, no. She says, I have a better idea. She said, why don't you drive to Oklahoma City? I said, why would I be driving to Oklahoma City when the game, Texas-Oklahoma game, is going on that weekend? She says, well, one reason is there's no traffic. You'll be going against the traffic. I said, well, that sounds logical. And so I drove to Oklahoma City against the traffic. It wasn't one car going to Oklahoma. They were all coming into Dallas. And I walk in the house, and she introduces me to her, to her parents. And then her father comes up. I said, honest to God, true story. And he shakes my hand, and he says, Mazel Tov. And I said, what, I just, met you. I said, that's a nice thing to say. He says, I'm saying it because I understand you're going to get engaged to my daughter. And that's how it happened.
How long were you married, Arthur?
Well, what you ought to ask me, how long was it since, how many times did I see her or date her until the wedding, January 29th in Oklahoma City?
Well, that too.
Well, I think she may have come down once or twice. So that's it. And the wedding was all planned, and it was in the Skirvin Hotel, and it was snowing, and all my family came up on the train. And this was January 29th, 1961, and they all came, to 300 people, and I had just seen her 2 or 3 times when we got married. But I listened to my father, and by the way, I had started working right after the party at Aunt Edith's. I started working at the law firm, and I said, this is what Dad wants, so might as well just, go along with it, and I went along with it for 48 years. Until she passed away. And as a lot of people know that were probably at the funeral, she passed away the day after our 48th wedding anniversary. And I told the story with the rabbi, and I was up there and I told the story. Judy was pretty strong-minded, as everybody that knew Judy spoke. Her friends called her the Truth Fairy. And and I knew that week that she wasn't going to make it, but the 29th was coming up, and there was a snowstorm, and it was freezing, and Judy hated cemeteries, but she really hated them in the bad weather, and I knew that she was not going to leave during that snowstorm, and sure enough, she stayed, held on, and then finally, at the end of the week, and it was January 29th, and I knew that nothing was going to happen until the next day. And as I told hundreds of people that came to the funeral that were her friends, I do have somewhat of a reputation for sometimes being late to various events. And one thing I don't do is go to the hospital early in the morning. That's not a big thing. So she figured out I would be there at approximately 12 o'clock. That was early, and for me. And I showed up at 12 o'clock at the hospital the day after our anniversary. And at that time, I showed up, and then she passed away.
Boy. And who are your role models, Arthur?
You mean in the community or
in
the Jewish community?
It can be the Jewish community, it could be life, in your, who are the people that you admire the most?
Well, the people that formed me, that made me and made my personality, I believe, is my mother and my father. My mother took me, when I was young, to all of the cultural events in Dallas. And we went to the symphonies, we went to the theater, and I went to the ballet, and I grew up under her tutelage. And she got me interested in the literature, everything to do with the arts. And I was fascinated with it, because I noticed a lot of my friends really kind of thought it was strange that I went to all of the, instead of being out there playing football, I'd go to the symphony or something like that. So she really formed a lot of and she also taught me how to dress. And she was in charge of that. And she says, you're not looking like all the other people. They're all wearing short pants. You're going to wear long pants. And that's the way she was. You're never going to eat on a paper plate. You will always eat on regular plates. You will not use plastic knives and forks. You will use regular knives and forks. So when you're young and you grow up like that, you continue to, I continue to cut my pizza with a knife and fork because I don't pick it up in my hand, which most people find amusing, but that's your history. That's how you learn, and that's what she taught me. So, and she was really a tremendous influence on me. The second was my father, because my father really was not that artsy, but he loved music. He did like Jewish music, and he had great philosophies because he was never judgmental. And one of the things he taught me, I never forgot, was you'll hear all these things about the difference between Shereth Israel and Temple Emmanuel and the Reform and the Orthodox and the Conservative. You're going to hear all these stories. And he said, let me tell you, I don't care where your sister and you go, as long as you go somewhere. So it doesn't make any difference to me. And in those days, the people that were really involved with their own synagogues and temples did not exactly feel that way. And I remember everything he taught me was based upon that. Just do the right thing, but you don't have to be judgmental.
Good lesson. That's a good lesson. Tell me about your children and your grandchildren. Do they live in Dallas? What do they do?
My daughter, Dana, lives in Charlotte.
Dana, her last name?
Dana Bisnoff. And she married Irv Bisnoff. And real quickly, the way they met is that we sent her off to school, the University of Arizona. And she called about the first week she was there, and it's the thing that your father does not want to hear. She said, Dad, I met somebody just like you. I said, oh my God. Or as they say today, OMG. And I said, well, what's going on, Dana? And she says, oh, I met this young man. And I said, good. And I said, is he going to be a lawyer, a doctor? Is he graduating? And there was a complete silence on the phone. And she said, no, Dad. She said, he's a freshman. And I said, sounds like there's more to it than that. And she came out with the most incredible line. I've never forgot that line. And and only she, you have to know her, would come out with the next line. She said, Dad, I know you don't believe this, but there are poor Jewish people in the United States of America. And that was, almost dropped the phone. Wonderful. My daughter, you just have to know her, you love her. And I said, okay, what's next? And then from there, they got engaged and they got married. They were teenagers and they got married. And I just adopted another son and sent him all the way through college. And today he is a managing partner at Deloitte Touche. And so in life, you take
Good for Dana. Good for Dana.
Yeah.
Good for Dana Ungerman.
That's what happened.
And your grandchildren?
Oh, my grandchildren.
Your daughters. Your daughter's children.
My daughter's children are just, actually you've got to take the grandchildren together. There are 4 grandchildren. There's my daughter's son, the firstborn was Benji Bisnoff. He was named after my grandfather. His name is Benjamin Isaac Bisnoff, just like Benjamin Isaac Goldberg. But he grew up to be pretty tall. And he just graduated a military school in North Carolina and got accepted to the college, the military college in Charleston, the Citadel.
Wow.
So, and then there is Allie. She's younger, and she's all into fashion and arts and probably will stay that way for the rest of her life. The youngest that Josh and Ellen have.
Oh, tell me a little bit about Josh before you tell me about
Josh
his
met,
children.
well, Josh met Ellen and he got married, and they had two beautiful kids. And the youngest is Samantha, and Samantha takes after my mother. She puts on plays for herself. She writes, and she's 9 years old now, and she's incredible, just incredible. And she can talk with an English accent like you've never heard. Very dramatic, and she is her grandmother's granddaughter. And Sloan is just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful young man, and he was bar mitzvahed, and now he's 14 years old, and he wants to be a lawyer. He's the one that's going to carry on the tradition to be an attorney. And the four of them, real quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but I came up with an idea 10 years ago when they were very small, and I told them when they were very small, I said, look, we're going to go on an adventure together for the next 10 years. And that adventure is you're going to go on a sleepover, because they all like sleepovers. But this sleepover is going to be different. You're going on grandfather's sleepover. And we will go to different places together. And we have no rules. You can do whatever you want to, except wake me up early in the morning. And it's going to be a different existence. And I'm going to show you there is something outside of school and all of the rules that you live by. And you're going to learn to think and do what you want to do. And we just completed our 10th year by going to Hotel des Glaces, which for those of you who may not know, there are 2 ice hotels in the world. And this is one of them in Montreal. The other's up in Scandinavia below the Arctic Circle. And I thought that'd be a little too cold. And it was the most exciting experience they have ever had, because truly it is made out of ice. It's like 22 degrees. And it's all done in sculpture. And then it melts, and then they rebuild it back again. And and of course these kids today, they've been everywhere. And they got all the things that you could possibly, and they all came up and they said, this is something that nobody will ever take us to, grandfather.
Lucky them.
So I've kept that up with my grandchildren.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't covered in this interview?
No, other than real quick, I'd like to say I did get married shortly after my wife passed away, and after talking to a lot of my friends and family, I am not the kind of person to live alone. We lived 48 years, a long time, and I met someone in the gym at the Bonaventure where I live, and when we met each other, it was just love at first sight. And her name is Helen Peroulas, and Helen is Greek Orthodox, and her family escaped from the Nazis and came to America and lived in a small town in Virginia, and she's a very interesting person. She's in the corporate world. She's an international tax lawyer. She's been with EDS, now Hewlett Packard, for 20 years. She did the acquisition, was on the team for the merger, and then she did the disentanglement when she came there of EDS and GM when Ross Perot was there. But more interesting is that she has a background of 1 foot in the little restaurant that they had. They being her brother, mother, and father, and they had nothing, and they put 2 kids through school and managed to also do the same thing. And she grew up in helping them out in that restaurant, and she was the epitome of My Big Fat Greek Wedding. If you recall that was her favorite movie. She's not very big and not very fat, though. In fact, she's beautiful, and she has the other foot in the corporate world. So she knows both of those, and it makes her an incredibly interesting person. And she's as beautiful on the inside as she is on the outside. So we've had 1 year, June 6th, that we were married, a year ago. And quickly, it was just a fantastic wedding because it was half Greek and half Jewish. And we went to our rabbi, Cherith Israel, and we went to her priest over at, across the street. That's the pink Greek Orthodox church across from Temple Shalom. And we went to both of them, and they were great. And they said, it's only one thing. Neither one of us can marry you because neither one of you are converting. And it doesn't work that way. And Rabbi Cherith Israel, he was just wonderful. She just fell in love with him. And I says, no, there's nothing we can do about it. You're going to have to find somebody. So that was a long story in itself. But we did find somebody, and we got married in Charlotte, where my kids, where Dana and Irv live. And we found a wonderful minister. This woman had a degree, and she had performed thousands of weddings. And she was fantastic. She says, you can have a very, very religious wedding. You can have a non-religious wedding. You can have a hippie wedding, whatever you want. And I said, you mean we can build it ourselves? I said, yeah. And she said, yes, and we did build our own wedding. And it was exactly 50% Greek Orthodox. The rituals were there, and 50% Jewish. Our rituals were there. And all the brachas were said, and then all the blessings over the bread in Greek were said by her brother. And it was a complete mixture. And I'll just end it by saying, when I first met her, I said, have you ever had a Jewish wedding? Have you done Greek weddings? And she looked at me and she said,
who's this?
This is the minister. And I was interviewing her. And she says, Arthur, she says, of course I have. She says, they're the same. And I said, what do you mean the same? The same. They talk with their hands, they have fun, they laugh. It's the same wedding. You can close your eyes, you can't tell the difference between the two. I said, have you ever had one together? She says, no, but I am looking forward to it. And that was the wedding.
Well, Arthur, it's been terrific talking to you. You're a pleasure.
Thank you for letting me participate in the program.